All right, thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Gaucho Amigos. I'm Alex. Today, my guest is Tim Good. He's a friend and a great guitarist. He's someone I've been bonding over Steely Dan with for a long time, and really just music in general. More so during the 6 or 7 year period when we both lived in New York together, but he now resides back in his hometown of Pittsburgh. So we met over Zoom to hash it out, talking about all the Steely Dan guitarists. We kind of go through them one by one, comparing their different styles and musical influence. And of course, as always, there are some detours along the way. In our conversation, before I play the episode, I just want to quickly mention that this is the last Buzzsprout episode. Between now and next Tuesday, I'm pulling the big lever, which will switch everything over to FM pods. I will have updates on Twitter with details about it, so stay tuned and keep an eye out for that. All right. Without further ado, this is me and Tim Good hashing it out about guitar players. Enjoy. When we did the episode of Winston, he basically gave you credit for his interest in Steely Dan. He said you showed him Bad Sneakers. Do you remember this? Because I've been trying to trace the absolute root of, my own Steely Dan thing, and I know it comes from Winston, but Winston is giving it to you. So you may have actually started this entire thing. It may trace back to you, Tim Good. Like
Just like Southland Tales.
that's true. That was also you, and that's become a thing as well.
Uh,
Although
I
I feel like
remember
that had to become a thing. It's just too insane,
it
right?
was it was gonna no matter what. When I was first getting into music in general, so like middle school, I was like buying albums occasionally and like digging through my parents' CDs. My stepdad had a copy of A Decade of Steely Dan, which is the greatest hits.
Yeah, I have it.
And it has what I think is kind of terrible cover art, which is kind of funny. Like it's like the least effort anyone's ever put into cover art. Just a
Yeah,
crumpled piece of gray paper.
that's true of a lot of Steely Dan album covers.
There's a lot of bad ones, but at least those like Can't Buy a Thrill or Royal Scam felt like a lot of effort went into them.
Yeah, that's true.
Uh,
Do you know the one for
Anyways,
like another? There's another greatest hits one where it's just like Steely Dan and graffiti on like a yellow garage. Have you seen that one?
yeah, I have. Yes, yes.
That one may actually be worse than the Decade of Steely Dan. It's a
Steely Dan
tough.
Gold also is bad cover art. It could be any band's album,
Yeah,
literally any.
yeah. And there's so many like incredible pictures of Donald and Walter or like and Skunk and these guys from back in the day. Like, why didn't they just use that? Like they perfectly capture who those guys were and what their music sounded like. I don't know, but
So yeah, my stepdad had the Decade of Steely Dan, and I remember very well putting it in my Walkman. I think that was an era where I would listen to a couple tracks on a CD. I'd put in my Bruce album and listen to Thunder Road and Born to Run, and then I'd turn it off.
got it.
And I'd listen to FM and maybe Babylon Sisters, I think was track two, and then kind of.
And then when did it pick up for you? Was it kind of around post college? Because that's when I was kind of getting into them in Winston also.
I started buying the albums probably late high school, early college.
Okay.
I remember I took a year. Like I dropped out of Allegheny College in early 2009 before we moved to New York. And I had a copy of Royal Scam in the car that I used to just listen to on repeat. I just didn't take it out of the CD player. So that was like an extremely formative summer of listening to that particular Steely Dan record. And it's always going to be my sentimental favorite.
Yeah. And as a guitarist, you probably enjoy because that's one of their more guitar heavy, guitar
It is,
focused
yeah,
records.
one of the most uh,
It's probably the
Just
most. I
the
mean,
most pyrotechnical
yeah.
guitar work of any of their records for sure.
And I feel like you were always kind of an aficionado of classic rock, kind of in general. Like that was your thing. I mean, I know you also were pretty into indie rock, at least when we started hanging out, but like you were very you knew a lot of bands. Like you would, take these discography deep dives on bands even beyond maybe the expected like Dark Side of the Moon or, the more expected obvious albums now.
That's how I always am with style. I get a mania for something, and then I spend months like obsessing over it and listening to nothing but reggae when I was living with Jess. Or reading like every Raymond Chandler novel in the space of like a couple months or something like that. Just like I finish one and I have to keep diving into it, digging stuff like that. And then Steely Dan wasn't like immediate, but I do remember hearing FM and thinking, okay, these guys are great.
And
But
you
I
were
was
cool with
still,
them because a
I'm
lot
sorry.
of people weren't cool with them. Like they thought they were lame. Even people who were into, classic rock, they weren't on like the cool list or whatever.
That's never been an issue because I was always like I also would have had Genesis albums at that time, and I'm trying to think.
Squeeze,
Squeeze,
right?
absolutely Squeeze, yeah.
Yeah. I almost associate Squeeze with you because I think you're the only Squeeze fan like I've ever met, like or that who's like really into
I'm
that.
a major Squeeze fan. I love Squeeze. Mm-hmm.
I was actually driving somewhere recently with Pat and Paulina, and they put on Squeeze's greatest hits, and I was like, "This is Tim's influence. Like no one else would be throwing on like driving home from somewhere, getting in the car. I would come back. I can't remember from where, but they threw that on, and they were like bopping to every tune. I was hearing some of that stuff for the first time. It's good. They're good.
East
Underrated
Side
band.
Story. Listen
Yeah.
to that one. East Side Story is a great record.
Yeah, so that's cool. So and I feel like when we started kind of bonding over music, you were for some things like that, you were kind of the only person that I could like Todd Rundgren, was a good example. Someone you were the only person I could be like, you know, something, anything you like that, like you got to check out, Wizard or Todd or something, So
I saw Todd Rundgren at the Pittsburgh Regatta
yeah.
for free in probably like seventh or eighth grade, And right after, I remember they were parachuting Elvis's that came down, and one of them broke his legs or something like that. Like it was a really surreal sort of event.
Holy shit! Wow. So that made an
Yeah,
impression on you, I guess.
yeah, absolutely.
It deepened your Todd bond. Um, so you don't remember playing Bad Sneakers for Winston, like that song specifically? Because like I said, he
Not
credits.
specifically. No, that's kind of funny. It, that's like not one of my favorite Steely Dan songs. I don't dislike it by any means, but it wouldn't be like a top 10
Mm.
Dan song. So I'm not saying that Winston's wrong. I just don't. It's hard for me to remember. You know what I mean? Like I don't have a
Yep.
firm memory of it, but I believe it. You know what I'm saying?
You may have played Katie Lied for him, and then that's the song that stuck out. Is that possible? Not that this
Also
really
entirely
matters.
possible. Yeah,
Yep.
I'll take it. You know what I mean?
So yeah, this entire Steely Dan thing can be traced back to that moment when
Can be traced back to Peter, my stepdad.
There you go. Yeah. Well, it's always going to come from a dad somewhere, I guess.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. Two main types of guitar pickups that are used in electric guitars, and pickups are essentially electromagnetic microphones.
mm-hmm.
There's single coil pickups, like you see in a Fender Stratocaster, and they're kind of pill shaped. It's the best way I can say it, with 6 poles on them, metal poles. And then there's humbucker pickups, which look like 2 single coils stacked together, and those frequently are seen on Gibson guitars, Les Pauls, hollow bodies. And I think most of these guitar players are defined by their preference for one or the other. Like you sort of know who you're hearing because the single coils have a slightly thinner, more trebly sound. I tend to think of them as being more tactile sounding.
Okay.
It's like Jimi Hendrix plays a Stratocaster with single coil pickups, and there's this almost like squishiness to the tone of a Stratocaster.
I should start
Versus,
listening for this.
well, you'll hear it now. Versus humbucker guitars like you hear
Yeah.
Larry Carlton play.
Okay.
Or most Led Zeppelin albums or a lot of classic rock stuff like that have a thicker, fatter tone, which there's the grass is always greener. You're always playing one and you want to do the other, you know. Both are great. That's why both continue to exist. But you can definitely pick out certain parts, like when you're listening to one of the early Dan records, you can tell if it's Denny versus Skunk, not just on the phrasing and how they play, but based on the tone, because Denny tends to use humbucker guitars and Skunk tends to use slightly thinner sounding single coils.
Yeah, I mean, Denny, what are your
Man.
thoughts?
So Denny's incredible. Denny's one of
Yeah.
my favorites. I think it's worth mentioning that he's one of the few people who lucked into being in Steely Dan. Right? They responded to his ad in the Village Voice.
Yeah, I think he was like living on Long Island and just posted a classified ad, and Donald and Walter literally just showed up at his like house. And can you
And
imagine?
the ad said something like must have jazz chops. And I would say down to the last Dan record, Denny tends to play the most jazz inflected leads.
Mm.
Like there's more Wes Montgomery and Kenny Burrell and stuff like that in his leads than even all the high paid LA session cats that they'd eventually get.
Do you think that came from before he met Donald and Walter, or do you think he kind of evolved with their, style and songwriting?
I think he was pretty developed from the first record. So I tend to think he's probably just a really talented jazz guitarist. But yeah, one of the only guys that just happened, like kind of lucked into being in Steely Dan, and then was still got called back all the way through Asia.
Yeah, I mean they're bringing in these, legendary guitar players, and then they're still using this guy that they randomly found through a classified.
Right. You can't say that about Jim. How do you say that? Jim Hodder.
Yeah, Jim Hodder.
Jim Hodder. He's not there after 1975, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they scrapped most. They moved through people really quickly and almost in a way that some people found unsavory. But they had a certain loyalty to Denny, I guess. I mean, he was a founding member, so.
And it makes sense when you listen to the solo on Gold Teeth.
Yeah,
Gold Teeth
that's my
too.
Gold Teeth. That's my favorite. That's one of my like absolute favorite solos in any Dan song, and I think that's my favorite Denny solo. Is that one. It's so good.
And one of the most jazzified.
Yeah.
Again, even comparing him to Carlton or Dean Parks or any of those guys.
Yep.
I think the best song to focus on when you're comparing the two, Denny and Skunk, is obviously Bodhisattva, because it has extended solos from both of them. Denny's the first one, and Skunk takes it home at the end. And you can hear the difference in the tone. You can hear Denny has a thicker, fatter, jazzier humbucker tone, whereas Skunk has this like raw sound, because obviously Skunk can play jazzy stuff too, but he's much more dyed-in-the-wool rock guitarist.
Yeah.
So you hear all this like bebop type of phrasing when Denny's playing. He's got how do I want to say it? Like he plays a lot of chromatic notes. So in like jazz speak, like he plays a lot of wrong notes that resolve into right notes.
Got it.
The way that someone like Charlie Parker might have done, whereas Skunk's the basis for that solo that Skunk plays at the end of that song is more in the blues.
For sure. Yeah.
and more in like he builds up to like a sort of crescendo of faster notes. It has more of a an arc to it, whereas Denny's just kind of blowing, if you will.
And I feel like Walter's guitar style is probably more similar to Denny's, right? Because doesn't he sort of have a jazz inflected? I mean, you know,
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
I tend to put him in between the two.
yeah, okay,
He I think tends to use Fender guitars, single coil, slightly crisper sounding guitars, but he has a little more of a propensity to go into a jazzier direction. So I think of him as being like almost directly in the center of the two of them.
got it. Yeah, and thoughts on Skunk?
Oh, I mean, I love Skunk. Skunk's awesome. I was just watching some of those midnight special
Yeah,
videos last night,
those are
and
great.
him playing the leads from my old school, just like right on the spot there.
Yeah,
It's pretty awe-inspiring to watch.
yeah, he was great. Although you can kind of see why they went their separate ways in terms of
Absolutely.
their style and I guess ethos and I don't know.
It
You
doesn't
know,
feel like there's as much room for Skunks playing on the later records. But then by the same token, you can't imagine any of those guys later on playing the solo on Ricky.
it's true.
And again, it's just more rooted in bluesy guitar playing than anything else. I guess maybe a good way to say it is that Skunk, unlike just about any other guitarist who would ever play with him, Skunk was able to resist the temptation to play jazz music. Yeah, I mean, so I don't have a ton of like experience listening to Derringer stuff, but
Yeah,
I think he gets lumped in with all these 70s classic rock guitar players, but he could really do the jazz rock stuff, I think, more than people give him credit for doing.
okay.
I watched a YouTube video maybe like a year or two ago, a while ago, of him playing Real American, just like Hulk Hogan's entrance music. I don't know if you
Oh wow.
ever watched WWF back in the day,
I
but
did as a kid, yeah. It's been a
yeah,
while though.
I'm a Real American. That's a pre-existing Derringer song. He didn't record it for Hulk Hogan,
Oh yeah?
but it was a newer video, and it had like a long solo jazz intro, and I thought, yeah, wow, okay, Rick can really do it. Yeah, it made sense at that moment, like, oh yeah, that's why Steely Dan would hire this guy. But yeah, I tend to think of him as playing those stinging slide guitar leads on Showbiz Kids. I'm not sure why they'd have him do that, not Skunk, because Skunk
Yeah.
can clearly do it too, as evidenced by the Midnight Special video of them doing it.
Yeah, well, that was kind of the beginning of their like proclivity to bring on, guys to do one very specific thing and that's it.
This is
Was
true. Although they were doing it even on the first record, Elliott Randall.
yeah. And the Real and solo is still one of the most, beloved and recognizable guitar solos in their discography. Because I think
So
Jimmy Page was like, Jimmy Page said it was like the greatest solo he's ever
favorite
heard.
solo ever, yeah. Yeah, Elliott Randall has that. Also using a single coil, thinner biting sound. Has that, like, how do I want to put it? It's even more in the rock direction than Skunk.
Yep.
And he comes back on Green Earrings, the second solo, which is
Oh
like
wow.
really intense. Yeah,
That's
it
great.
almost sounds like Van Halen-y type of stuff. Yeah, he just goes in guns blazing on Green Earrings. Here's a fun fact about Elliott Randall, or two fun facts, I guess, is that he was invited to join Steely Dan and declined.
Well, when was this?
I think around the time Pretzel Logic was being recorded, or maybe shortly thereafter. So he was right to not. It wasn't really going to be a band anymore. He was also invited to join Toto.
Really?
Yeah, he would have been Steve Lukather instead of
Steve Lukather.
Steve Lukather. But
Why do you think he declined? Do you know?
I think he likes doing session work. I think he didn't want to probably have to like do too much touring and just like navigate a band. That would be my guess. He was doing pretty well. Like
Yep.
nowadays, you think Lukather's a way bigger deal, but at the time it would have made sense.
Did he also play on Boz Scaggs' Silk Degrees? Because I saw there's this SNL clip of him playing with Boz that's incredible, where he's like clearly just coked out of his gourd.
I don't think he's on the record. Louis Shelton. Fred Tackett. Oh, Fred Tackett's on that album. I didn't realize that. Fred Tackett has sort of replaced Lil George and Little Feat.
Okay. I haven't listened to like any post George Little Feat. Is that worth checking out?
I mean, I don't want to say anything ill about one of my favorite classic rock bands, but I'm mostly there for Lowell. But it allowed them to keep touring. They're one of those groups, right, where it seems like you see the album cover and you kind of think, okay, well, I'm not going to take this very seriously. But yeah, they're excellent. I saw somebody one time compare them to a mix between the band and Steely Dan, which is something I've stuck with me.
Well, they say time loves a hero, but only time will tell if he's real. He's a legend from heaven. If he ain't, he was sent from hell. He'll be well. To see it ain't always believe. Just make sure it's the truth that you're seeing. Eyes sometimes lie. Eyes sometimes lie. They can be real deceiving. Got an uncle in Puerto Rico.
Something I was thinking about just preparing for this is that I think Larry Carlton is maybe like the prototypical Steely Dan musician, right? Like when people imagine Steely Dan, they hear Larry Carlton's guitar.
Yeah. He's my favorite
he-
guitarist in the whole, the whole thing. I gotta go with Larry.
He's impossible to compete with in
Yeah.
that regard. I mean, they also gave him all the best things to do, though. I think like getting to take the solo on Kid Charlemagne, that's like I don't want to say it's lobbing it over the plate because those are hard chords to play over. I've done it. Charlemagne's my specialty on the Pittsburgh wedding band circuit.
Oh yeah, you guys do Charlemagne?
Occasionally, I don't
Any
really
other-
do weddings anymore, but
No.
if I was strapped for cash, I show up and I tell them, by the way, I could do Charlemagne, and close with it or something like that.
You got that in your back pocket. Do you ever any other Steely Dan songs that you've played,
With wedding bands
or just in general?
in general, let's see. So the wedding band's done Peg. I've definitely done that. And we did I'm trying to think Home at Last as well, which was kind of a weird choice, but that's what the people wanted. And then I did a show a few years ago on Black Friday with just a band I was playing with at the time, and I insisted that we learn Black Friday. I wasn't gonna do it if we didn't learn that song. So
Would you ever consider being in a Steely Dan cover band? Because they're all the rage right now. I mean, there's literally dozens and dozens of them popping up all over the country.
I don't think so. Number one, it's a lot of work. Ask Jeff Harrington. He's got to like mimic all these guys.
Yep.
And try to do his own spin on it. So
John Harrington.
That's his name, right?
Yeah, you got it. I think you said Jeff.
I'm sorry,
Wow.
John. Jeez, I keep screwing this up. Yeah, I met John Harrington at Marked when I was bussing tables. He was with the pianist as well. So yeah, I was starstruck.
Were you actually starstruck by?
I saw him come in and I thought, that's Harrington. That's the guy.
Had you seen the Asia show
Mhm.
at that point? Okay,
Mhm.
so you knew his prowess. Yeah.
I knew he was a beast.
He's a beast. So yeah, no, that's a no on the Steely Dan cover band. But you can play Charlemagne.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like to take projects that I know I'm going to fail at. So I would always feel like I wasn't doing it justice. Like if
Are
I
you
had
doing?
to do Skunk and then do Larry and then do Peg and stuff like that, I'd always feel like I was not totally doing it or something like that, you know. I would avoid it probably.
But you've done other cover band stuff because didn't you were in a Dead cover band, right?
I was in a band that did a show of Dead songs,
Oh, okay.
but it wasn't a full on Dead project.
Got
And
it.
I did a Birds tribute band last year for a little while.
Oh yeah.
We did Sweetheart of the Rodeo as the first set, and then I grabbed the 12 string and we did the greatest hits for the second set.
Cool.
But I did that a handful of times, and it was like, all right, that's enough.
Yeah. So you're not doing cover band stuff anymore?
Not if I can help it.
What's your current project?
Um, we just finished an album that's like half my songs, half stuff that a like elementary school friend of mine wrote. The band's called Cosmic Wind. But the band's completely defunct at this point.
I know Cosmic Wind. Yeah, you guys have been doing stuff for a while.
We haven't actually all four been in the same room since before COVID. So
Oh, wow.
the chances of that, yeah, but the record's finally done. So, you know, whatever that means. And I play with my friend Dan Gecken in a sort of alt country type of thing. We've been doing old time gospel music for a while now,
Really?
which has ups and downs.
As a guitarist, what is that like to play that kind of music?
It's basically country and blues music. So I like doing it. I love doing
it. Yeah, it's in your wheelhouse.
And then I sometimes play with a local guy named Chet Vincent, who's singer-songwriter type stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, no tribute bands for the time.
No tribute bands. Would you though go back to one or no?
If I had like a good gig, you know, like if I knew it was going to be on a good stage for a lot of people and there was going to be preparation that went into it, sure. There's this thing in Pittsburgh right now called Pittsburgh Plays, where they choose a band every year and they set up maybe 4 groups, give or take, 4 or 5 groups, and they each do 5 or 6 songs. Last year it was Queen. The year before it was Fleetwood Mac. But that also, it feels kind of like adult school of rock to me. Like you sign up and you get placed in a band and told what songs you're going to play, and so no interest, you know. So if it was like my friends and we had a good venue and we were going to rehearse, sure, I would play Steely Dan covers for a night, or I'd go back to doing Dead stuff or whatever, you know what I mean? Anything like that.
When you did the Dead stuff, were you playing the role of Jerry essentially, or not?
There sort of 2 lead guitar, like there was another lead guitarist in that band, so we were kind of trading.
There were 2 Jerrys.
Yeah, but I was always saying, you know, I ain't no Bob. So
you just didn't want to be Bobby, right?
No one wants to be Bobby, right?
He's the only one who's still doing it.
A friend of mine was at a Dead show not long ago, and he saw a bumper sticker that said "Bobby fans are people too." It really says it all. But yeah, you know, I would do that again. It was fun, but pretty quickly it devolves into being something that's like kind of depressing once you've done 3 or 4 in a row.
Yeah.
The Dead's fun to do because you can screw it up and it sounds fine. You can be kind of sloppy.
Because they were kind of sloppy.
Yeah, it's like the right kind of seasoning.
Yeah. The Dan is harder to do, but people do it. I mean, and they go for it. Like these Dan cover bands that are all over the country, they emulate the kind of big band format of, you know, the Steely Dan band, and it's, you know, usually 10, 12 people on stage, and there are a lot of them. I don't even know where all these people are come from.
Power to them. I respect anybody that would take on that challenge. It's just something that I would always feel like I was not doing 100%. So I know better than to sign up for something like that when I'm never going to be happy with it.
Yeah, and this is absolutely no disrespect to any of you listeners who are in a Steely Dan cover band, because I'm sure a few of you are. Absolutely. I actually think the hardest part of it is not the musicianship or learning the songs. It's capturing the voice. I think Donald's voice gives Steely Dan the sound that when you hear a cover band doing it, it always just something sounds a little off, and I think it's the voice. It's just hard to do it. It's just hard to pull off that mixture of those songs with the right vocal texture or something. I don't know,
Mhm.
or attitude. Like I've watched, I've watched some YouTube clips of these many bands. There's Steely Dan, Steely Danish, the Brooklyn Charmers, Only Dan. I mean, I could reel them off. Only Dan's is one of the better
That's
names.
good. I like them a lot.
Yeah. They're from Baton Rouge. I mean, there's literally, there's tons of them. And yeah, I mean, the musicianship, the singing, they do it, they do it, but I feel like it's just hard to capture the attitude or the essence. I also do think that if it had been the other way around and Donald had passed before Walter, I don't think we'd be seeing Steely Dan touring. I don't know if you could pull that off.
No, I don't think so.
And that's not to say again that Walter was less, crucial to Steely Dan necessarily, but it's just like you could still tour a Steely Dan with Donald, but I feel like you couldn't with only Walter. So I think if when Donald, the day will come obviously at some point, and then, you know, that'll be the end. So
When Walter passed, the first thing I thought of was how much I will miss the spoken section of A19, which I think I could almost recite from memory at this point.
from the night you saw them or just from a recording?
He does it pretty much. He was doing it pretty much every time, I think, where it'd
Yeah.
say, by that point, the Chiba Chiba's gone. And you're starting to think, what is that mysterious gold liquid? Or something like this, right? Like it's, it was that part was always just one of my favorite moments.
Well, he would change them up. I mean, he would change them up every time. I don't know if they were improvised or he'd actually, I don't know. I mean, they're good. Because I've listened to or watched a bunch of, concerts, and I feel like they're different every time I've seen them. So
That makes sense.
yeah.
He used a sense of humor, right? I mean, I love Donald, but both of them are major heroes to me.
Yeah.
But I think the snarkiness, right, was Walter.
Yeah. Walter had the acerbic wit, was just so biting. Um,
You would know more about this than I do. Outside of Dylan, I always think like what groups could possibly have led into Steely Dan existing, right? Like there's obviously there's some Dylan there. There's some, it's impossible to not be influenced by the Beach Boys or the Beatles, obviously. Certainly Blue Note Records and things like that.
Yep.
But I want to say at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Walter brought up the Mothers.
I know Walter's a big fan.
Yeah, I
of
love
them.
that.
Yeah, there was well, it's funny because he's still very divisive. He hasn't had also like there's no Zappa shit going on besides people who are already in the Zappa thing. It's not like people are jumping on the Zappa bandwagon now.
Mhm.
But there is a Rolling Stone article from like 1974 where they mention each other. Like Zappa says something about like, oh yeah, Steely Dan, they're one of the best groups going right now.
That's awesome.
And apparently Ruth Underwood was like a hardcore Steely Dan fan
That makes sense.
and kind of got Frank into them. And then uh, Donald and Walter, in a few interviews, bring up they were fans of the Mothers. And apparently they actually saw them in like 1967, like an early Mothers show. Is that possible that it would be that
Yeah,
early,
that makes sense.
67?
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Like either they drove down from Bard to the city to see the Mothers because they were fans. So yeah, you're right. You nailed it. They are, and I'm a fan, and I know you're a fan. But not I see both sides. Some Steely Dan fans. I mean, you would think there's a lot of overlap there in terms of the humor and sort of the jazz, rock fusion of it. But some are not down with that particular sense of humor. Because it is a bit different, and Steely Dan was doing, they were bringing irony and these sort of sarcastic lyrics into their music, but it wasn't like, satirical, I guess, in the same way that Zappa was.
He got more scatological as he got older as well. I think that's what a lot of people have in mind when they picture him. talk about not eating yellow snow and zirconium encrusted tweezers and so on and so forth, you know. And to me, obviously, his greatest work is the middle period of the original Mothers Band. We're only in it for the money through Hot Rats.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that era.
Right end of the,
Yeah.
right at the end rather of the original Mothers.
The original Mothers, yeah. Yeah. And if I had to guess, that's probably what I feel like Donald and Walter would have been into as well, if I had to guess. But
one does not picture them listening to Chic Your Booty.
no, that feels a little bit, I don't know, beneath them or something. But who knows? Yeah.
Imagine like a hypothetical Zappa guest spot on a Dan song.
What wouldn't have worked is Zappa, I feel like, needed to be in control at all times, and that is not something that Donald and Walter would relinquish under any, circumstances. So
no, it probably wouldn't have worked, but when you go back and look at it, there's more stuff that Walter plays leads on than I always remember.
Yeah.
Like
I think there's a lot of focus placed on these guys they brought in, but Walter played on a lot of it. Especially on the
Bez, Bad Sneakers, Black Friday. That's all Walter.
What about FM? Is that one of his or no?
FM? Yep.
FM is him too, right? But there's a couple solos on FM. It might be him and someone else.
But I think that first one, that like that thing in the intro, I'm pretty sure is Walter.
Yeah. And then when they did the reunion albums, I feel like they, used a fair amount of Walter too.
Totally.
It's just cool.
Yeah, he's a huge, how do I want to put it? His playing exemplifies a certain Steely Dan-ness.
Yeah.
Whether he's playing lead or rhythm. Although it's also worth mentioning that they used him towards the end about as much as they used any session musician. Like he's not on every song on Gotcha.
Yeah. I was just looking at the credits for Babylon Sisters recently, and Donald and Walter do not play on that song at all. It's literally all session guys. It's only Donald's vocals. That's the only credit to either Donald and Walter on that song. And it's one of the greatest Steely Dan songs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are like, I frequently compare them to like the Beach Boys of the 70s or something like that. Where, like you're listening to Pet Sounds and it's just Brian. If Brian's even there, it might be an instrumental and Brian's in the control booth.
Yep. But it still all sounds like the same band, which is cool.
Yeah.
They brought all these different, they're almost like, I almost think of them as like filmmakers. They're like directors making a movie, and they're bringing in all these different people to enact their vision.
Absolutely true. So around Katie Lied, you start to get Carlton, and obviously, you can't say enough about the Charlemagne solo. I think he improvised that. Like they brought him in, he just played that. Just insane. That's completely insane. What I mean? That's one of the best guitar solos ever. And it, again, those aren't easy chords to navigate. There's a lot of weird changes in there.
Yeah.
And the fact that he played things that are hummable, but still have that complexity, still like reflect the chord changes and everything. Oh man, yeah, that's pretty awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
He also plays in my mind, the really iconic lead guitar part on Black Cow, which is maybe one of the first things most people hear.
Right.
If they listen to Steely Dan for the first time,
that's true.
Asia, and you hear da 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 that thing.
Yeah.
That'd be Larry.
There you go. Well, he also worked on some of the arrangements, I think, on Asia. So he was also doing, some other things musically in terms of bringing that music to life. Why do you think Steely Dan just didn't make Larry Carlton their guitarist? Because I think he would have done it, He plays on a lot of the songs, obviously, but why wasn't he just, a full-fledged member of the band?
Maybe they were just past that concept by that point.
Yeah.
He almost did. You almost want to say that he is after a certain point. He's on so many tracks and in such important capacities. You can't imagine hearing the song "The Royal Scam" without Larry Carlton, for example. Right?
Yeah.
So I just maybe tend to think that they're just past the idea of a working band, anything resembling a democracy. So why even go there? It's like this is gonna sound like a really stupid comparison, maybe, but like two people who just like having sex. Like they're not gonna complicate it by trying to
Make it into a relationship.
meet the parents. Like they knew that what they had worked.
Yeah.
Why complicate it with emotions? Right.
I like that.
That'd be my guess.
But apparently it did become complicated because Larry felt very snubbed by his peg solo not being used. Because if you've seen the Classic Albums Asia episode, they went through a whole bunch of solos before they landed on Jay Graydon. And I think Larry's was one of them. And obviously Larry did brilliant work. So I think he felt shafted by that omission.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess Jay Graydon, I think, seemed to have brought something completely unique to the table, right? Like the sort of Hawaiian intro. There's just not something that that Larry was going to have thought of at the time. Jay Graydon played with Al Jarreau, I think. That was like his main gig at the time.
Yeah.
And then
went from Al Jarreau to Steely Dan.
And wrote "After the Love Is Gone" for.
He wrote that song. Fire. It's a great song. Great ballad.
Definitely. Him and David Foster. A couple more to go through here, and these ones are what I would say are the real session musicians, where their contributions are defined by, how do I want to put it? They're not supposed to stick out as much. Guys like Steve Kahn, who's sort of similar mold to Carlton. Like you bring him in for just really lush, jazz inflected playing. He definitely is the guitarist on Babylon's Sisters and plays the solo on My Rival.
Yeah, he's a big Gaucho contributor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he shows up more and more as you go through the records. Dean Parks is another. Famously plays the Haitian Divorce solo with the talk box.
Talk box, yeah. Mm-hmm. Love that.
It's excellent playing. And then Hugh McCracken is the other one.
He plays on Hey 19, right?
He's the lead on the beginning of Hey 19.
Yeah, which is a iconic intro.
He's one of those guys, like he's a real session musician. He plays one of the lead parts on Brown Eyed Girl.
Oh yeah.
He's on Ram. He plays the electric guitar on 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Like he'd been at it for a while. This is like the definition of a session guitarist, Hugh McCracken. And then one more. I've left my favorite for the last one. My personal favorite guitarist of all time.
I know who it's going to be.
Mark Knopfler. Right. So they heard him playing Salt and the Swing. And like everybody else at that time, it's like, oh wow, this is an incredible sound. And I think they had him play for like 4 hours or something like that to get the 30 seconds that they use for Time Out of Mind. But you can tell, you put that track on and you instantly hear he's one of the poster children for that like single coil guitar sound, that thinner.
Okay.
And you just hear the tone from Songs of Swing come off the record along with Steely Dan.
Yeah, I think Fagan must have heard that and been like, can we get this guy? Because that's the mentality they had. It was just like they would hear shit and be like, can we bring him in? Can we get him in?
I don't think he enjoyed the experience. That's what I'm led to believe, that like he felt like they kind of just had him play and play and play and play and then chopped it up into something that was like not recognizable to him. But I don't know if that's
That was the experience of most on the kind of the Gaucho sessions. It's a lot of negativity and bad vibes.
right.
And also this was the depths of Walter's heroin years. So it was just like
Sure.
Fagan was deep in whatever, more of a workaholic, obsessive perfectionist OCD kind of thing. So between the two was not a great time to be working with them. And most of the stories that you hear about those years reflect that. So
It's so cool to me though, as a massive Dire Straits fan as well, to get to hear the mashup of the two together
is Knopfler really your favorite guitarist?
easily.
What about him? Why is he your fave?
I think it's just one of those things like you don't control what you love. Not to say that I would
Yeah.
choose someone else, but like I can listen to him play for hours and enjoy all of it. He can take a 10-minute solo and I will wish it was an 11-minute solo. I just like the timbre.
The timbre.
He plays in a really unusual way. Like without a pick,
Right.
he tends to play like, I think, clawhammer style. So like a banjo player plays, like a lot of people who finger pick tend to pick up, like towards your face, maybe like with your fingers. And I think he tends to pick out with his fingers, which is just highly unusual for
Yeah.
a guitarist. So
Is that how
there's
he gets his sort of signature sound, do you think? Because it is pretty
Hypothetically-
recognizable. Yeah.
hypothetically, I don't think anyone can do it but him. Really.
Wow.
I'm sure there's people who spent their whole lives learning to mimic it.
Right.
And maybe some of those could trick me, but in general, I don't really, never hear anyone that sounds like him exactly. And I just think he has a brilliant mind for playing exactly what you're supposed to play at the time you're supposed to play it.
Like note choice and timing and
Yeah, there's a soulfulness. Is the best way I could describe it. And I don't mean that like literally, like it sounds like soul music. Just like there's a melodicism, and he mixes blues and jazz and country in a way that I just don't think other players, maybe they just don't have that exact alchemy.
Yep.
To the name of my favorite Dire Straits album, actually. their live album from the mid '80s, which is like really incredible, really super underrated. They sound like
I have not heard that.
Pink Floyd sort of on that record. Like they stretch out a lot, and there's a lot of synthesizers and things.
This is Money for Nothing era now, right?
It's right before.
Right before, okay.
Right,
That's
right
cool.
before.
I'd like to hear that.
But yeah, other than the only person I would say who's anywhere close to Mark in my pantheon of great guitarists is Richard Thompson. I love Richard Thompson.
Yeah.
Don't think he would have mixed with the Dan very well.
That's a different thing entirely. Yeah, because he's drawing more from folk and stuff.
But as far as lead guitar players go, those two stand head.
Those are your
shoulders
two.
above the others. Yeah, absolutely. My favorite Dan guitarist, other than I'm not counting Knopfler, is Carlton for sure.
Yeah, that's my fave for sure. Yeah. Cool, man. Do you have what are your favorite solos in the do you have particular favorites?
Absolutely. I love Denny's solo on Bodhisattva, the first solo.
Okay.
Especially when he gets into that, when he starts to play fewer notes. Like he starts off going real heavy in the bebop stuff, and then it's like has that ba-do-da-do sort of second half. I always just sort of stop what I'm doing and focus on it when I hear it. Let's see. I think it's Skunk on Night by Night is like really burning on that solo.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love that. We talked about it earlier. I love that second solo on Green Earrings, the Elliott Randall one. That's just balls to the wall.
Yep.
Crazy sounding. And then I don't know how many times I've picked through Charlemagne at this point. Like that one's just, it's very.
Yeah.
And it's just the definition of what can be done with a guitar solo on its own.